Hello and welcome to this month's Altitude. Today we'll be talking about how our emergency services help save lives and they serve the public in the skies. My name's Adi Dolan and I'm delighted to be back here in the hot seat again, especially as this month we're joined by two very special guests who I'm usually speaking to in the skies over London and around Heathrow, but today we are in far more comfortable surroundings. We've got Captain Andrew Brandt from the National Police Air Service and Captain David Rolfe from the London Air Ambulance Service. Hi, Andrew.
Good afternoon.
And hello there to Dave.
Hi, good afternoon.
Welcome both guys to Altitude. It's great to have you joining us with us today. For those watching live, please remember to submit your questions and we'll try and get through as many as we can at the end. I'm sure there's going to be loads. But before we get going, let's find out about our two guests and how they got into, let's face it, what are pretty cool aviation jobs. David, if someone had told you as a kid that you'd be flying around London in a bright red helicopter, would you have believed them?
No, absolutely not. I even remember as a teenager making a little cardboard Dauphin model of London Hems, wanting to do it and never quite believing it would happen.
So how did it all start for you? How did you get into it?
Well, I've loved aviation for as long as I can remember. And I was an air cadet, went to university, joined the air squadron and did some flying there. And then did a couple of years working for British Aerospace, but got some more flying at the Flying Club while I was there. And then started my commercial helicopter license, gosh, almost 20 years ago now. Started my career flying onto the oil rigs, did that for about 7.5 years out of Aberdeen. And then managed to go on shore and actually did some police flying. Did a few years flying for the police for the Chiltern Air Support Unit out of Henlow, Herts, Beds and Thames Valley region. A couple of years corporate flying, and then I've been lucky enough to do this job for just under 12 years now.
Wow, so quite a bit of variety in there then.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate.
Fantastic. And Andrew, what was your flying route into NPAS, and what was it about helicopters that excited you over perhaps fixed wing flying?
Good question. Well, I think I grew up watching a little bit too much Top Gun, so I always wanted to kind of go down the fast jet route. But unfortunately, I wasn't successful with the RAF. So I was then thought, well, what's the civilian world got to offer? And I was kind of absolutely captivated by helicopters, just the versatility, all the different roles they can be used for, and obviously the emergency services, how they can be used to serve the public. And that really just took hold. To doing a little bit with the cadets. I then worked for an aircraft engineer role whilst building some MAUs as an instructor and doing a little bit of aerial filming both around London but also in Hong Kong. And then eventually, just before the pandemic struck hold, I was successful in my application to NPAS and been here for 4 years, and I absolutely love it. It's kind of a dream job. It's very, very rewarding.
Wow, fantastic. So you're at NPAS today. And thankfully there are some other pilots right now manning the helicopters. I'm guessing that's true. Yeah, that's great. So you have turned up for your shift though, and is there such a thing as an average day in the life of an NPAS pilot?
Well, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but every day is very different. We usually have 2 helicopters available throughout most of the day. Yesterday, for example, I ended up doing a number of pursuits, a couple of suspect searches, missing persons searches. On the weekend, sometimes it could be a little bit quieter. For example, last Sunday morning, early doors, I thought, okay, this is going to be a fairly quiet shift. It was a day shift, and yet come 8 o'clock in the morning, the radio kicks off. There's a pursuit over in northeast London. We think, gosh, we can help out with this. So run out to the aircraft, get it going. Flies across to northeast London, fairly low level, trying to beat some of the headwind, and caught it just as the car was doing a U-turn, followed by police officers. We get on scene, they can then back off. It crashed into a building, continues going, bits of car flying off all over the place. The guy gets out, runs across the field, and goes into a block of flats. We managed to contain it, get the dog sniff, and lo and behold, one detained. So even a quiet day can suddenly just the drop of phone call, the scramble phone as we call it, suddenly your day's turned upside down. And then when you're in flight, you just never know what you're then going to be tasked to. It might be a case where you think you're going to one thing and you get reassigned 3 or 4 different times in flight before you even arrive on scene. And I'm sure that's very similar to the PEM situation. So that's one of the key kind of aspects of the role I love, is that dynamic, the decision making, that you've really got to be on your top game at all times, just to make sure that you can perform the best, and you never quite know how the day is going to pan out.
Absolutely. I mean, Dave, does that ring any bells with you? Is it just quiet and then bang, or is it fairly steady, or how does it work?
No, absolutely. I mean, you can have a day where, very fortunately for the people of London, we don't get any jobs, but then other days you're going to be busy all day. We average about 3 jobs on the aircraft a day, and when the aircraft's not there, the team are in cars, and they probably do another 3 overnight. So, but as you say, it comes in busy periods and quiet periods. But that, as Andrew says, is the joy of the job. You're just sitting here, just waiting, and then have to make a bunch of very quick decisions, and everything happens very, very quickly. So no, that's certainly the buzz from doing it.
So Dave, just take us on board the helicopter with you. Where are you sitting? Left seat, right seat, or is it just the one seat?
So we always fly with 2 pilots.
Okay.
That's been the case ever since we started. We alternate seats. So the captain of the day, he tends to be doing the flying, flies from the right-hand seat, and then the pilot monitoring, who could be another captain, one of our senior first officers, sits in the left-hand seat. They tend to do the navigation and the communication with the ambulance service, and then the pilot flying does the flying and then talking to yourselves. In the back, we always carry at least 1 doctor and 1 paramedic, but generally we try and have a crew of 3 in the back. So a consultant, a very senior emergency medicine doctor, and a paramedic. The paramedics are generally have got extra skills as well. They're trained with extra skills when they come to us. They're also experienced in the job. And the idea being really that we're trying to bring the emergency department to the side of the road rather than the patient having to come to the hospital.
Right, okay. And whereabouts are you located as your base, Dave?
So we stand by on top of the Royal London in Whitechapel in the East End of London. The aircraft itself stays overnight at RAF Northolt. But yeah, we wait for jobs on top of the Royal London in Whitechapel.
Okay. And then Andrew, who's on board with you? Who's in the back?
So there's at least a minimum crew of 3. So it's myself, the pilot. We fly single pilot, and then I've got at least 2 police officers on board. The front left police officer, we call them tactical flight officers. These guys and girls are at the top of their game. They go through rigorous selection and then training process. So it's great to be working with them. The front left police officer is operating effectively the mission kit, the camera system, and then in the back there's a mission commander. So that mission commander is that they fulfill a number of roles. They basically prioritize the tasks that we go to, and then when we arrive on scene, they kind of give me the direction and the camera operator on how they want to conduct this search, this operation, whatever it may well be. And obviously in a pursuit as well, they take tactical command of that. So that means giving commentary, but also starting to think about, if they need to put in roadblocks or sting sites or whatnot. So they are kind of the glue that holds the whole team together. But, without any one of us, the operation just couldn't work. Obviously, the safety side is slightly more on my bit, but we rely on each other, and we couldn't do the role without all 3 being present and doing a job correctly.
So I suppose your aircraft do similar tasks, but they're also very different. So I guess camera technology and those kind of bits of kit on yours, Andrew, are kind of mark yours out as being quite different from a normal helicopter. So what kind of kit have you got on board without giving away too many secrets?
It's a great question. So we have a camera turret that has a number of different systems inside that. So there is basically high definition camera with various different zoom levels, and there's also an infrared camera. Now the infrared camera is that kind of black and white imagery that you might see sometimes on the news. It picks up heat, so it's fantastic for at night when we are beginning to lose the light and the camera becomes less useful. There is a low light camera, so we can still get more detail than perhaps you would have thought. And then in the back, there's a couple of screens where the mission commander can overlay the various different camera feeds on one screen, but also a mapping system. And there's this great functionality where they can basically put an address in to the mapping system, and then because the aircraft knows where it is, the camera knows where it is, and it knows the position of that street or park or whatever, the camera can then be aligned directly to that that address. So it does help. So I have a repeater screen, so I can suddenly see where the camera's pointing, and then I can expedite, obviously with ATC's help, getting to that location, that scene as quickly as possible. And then we have the ability to downlink, it's called, basically broadcast what we can see to the ops room, to other emergency services. So to help with situational awareness for public orders, for large protests, for example, but also in a pursuit situation, so that a tactical commander on the ground can start making other decisions on risk levels and other assets that need to be involved. So we have that ability to be an eye in the sky and really a force multiplier, I guess you could say, to allow other people to see what we're seeing.
Fantastic. And Dave, for you, it sounds like you're pretty much an A&E department in the back. So what kind of stuff are you taking to a pretty awful scene?
Yeah, I mean, we carry quite a lot of interesting stuff. So we carry blood. That's probably one of the biggest things we do. So we're able to take blood to the scene of accident, which means they can get a transfusion there and then. We also carry ultrasound, all the monitoring equipment you'd see in a hospital, and some equipment the doctors and paramedics are able to do some pretty impressive stuff on scene. For example, they can do some pretty rudimentary heart surgery. It generally tends to occur, unfortunately, if somebody's been stabbed. And we also have a way of stopping bleeding around the pelvic area. So, for example, in an accident where maybe somebody's come off their bicycle and been near a motor vehicle, they have a very good technique called Reboa now, where they're able to put a little balloon within the pelvic area and stop the bleeding. So yeah, real variety of kit, and it's amazing what they can do on scene.
Incredible. But Dave, for your role in particular, how does the team work in terms of dealing with those kind of critical incident stress management scenarios where you're dealing with something which is such kind of high adrenaline? There's real life or death moments right there and then you have to deal with the route back to base and then the aftermath. And how do you all cope with that as individuals and as a team?
I think that's one of the advantages of having sort of the pilots and then the medics in the back. So I think Andrew would probably say the same with the police. Our main job is to try and keep our head in the aviation game from the safety point of view. But we'd be lying to say that these things didn't affect us. What tends to happen is when the aircraft lands on scene, one pilot stays with the aircraft at all times, and then another pilot will sometimes go to scene to help just do very basic tasks, just things that you'd expect any member of the general public to do: hold things, carry things, just do what they're instructed to do. And as you say, once some of these very traumatic cases have taken place, one of the best ways is just all of us to get together afterwards and talk it through. We have professional help in the background as well, but some of it can just be having a team having a cup of tea or coffee afterwards back at base and just talk things through. Because one of the challenges is sometimes if you were to go home and hadn't had that opportunity, it's quite difficult to share some of the details, even with your own family, because they don't necessarily need to know some of the stuff. But it's predominantly we debrief. We always debrief after every job anyway, but just those tea room chats make a big difference. And as I said, if there's more to it, then we have professional help on hand as well.
Fantastic. One of the things that I notice from the tower all the time, as the sun goes down, you look across London, and the number of red lights which indicate high buildings it's a sea of red these days. And Andrew, I guess for you, let's face it, baddies tend to come out at night. So you get quite busy at night, don't you? So how on earth do you deal with that kind of difficulty of maneuvering yourself around London, the changing skyline all the time? There's cranes going up everywhere, and being aware of yourself within space.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. London is busy. It is constantly being developed or redeveloped. But I kind of fall back to what David said. We work as a team and on board the aircraft. My role is to keep my head in the aviation game. That's what I've got to do. And for that, it means keeping separation from the other, the buildings you mentioned, all the cranes. So at the start of every shift, we'll do a daily briefing. That means looking at the weather, but also more increasingly looking at the NOTAMs, which are notice to airmen, and more we see cranes and drones. So these are two things that crop up, and they obviously make a big difference to me. Obviously light shows and other bits and pieces, but keeping track of where the cranes are, and obviously lit cranes are the ones you can see. We also look out for the ones you can't see. So obviously, so that's part of the situational awareness that we as a crew build before we go out flying. So if we know we're going to a job where there are some new developments, for example, there's a really high rise building that's coming up in northeast London, we share that knowledge within the crew so that at least someone, especially myself, is aware of that. And drones, certainly, as I mentioned, that's becoming more and more of a thing. Where are the drones going to be, and making sure that it's my job to keep well clear of those. So a lot of it is done still see and void, making sure that our height is sufficient when operating around the buildings. We're very lucky we have dispensation to fly, should we say, lower than other civil operators, but it's still down to, just because we have those minimums doesn't mean that we always fly to that minimum level. We try and be as high as we possibly can. We're acutely aware of the fact this helicopter generates a lot of noise. At 3 o'clock in the morning, that's not going to be appreciated by London. Now, bear in mind, we try and keep as high as we can. There are some tasks that we have to be low. Certain angles I need to get to be able to clear a building line, or sometimes being lower, actually, you've got 3 sets of eyes on board the aircraft, no matter the camera gear. Actually, the extra pair of eyes looking out the window, you might see something that if you were up at 2,500 feet, you perhaps wouldn't. So there are times where we're lower, and when we are lower, we're acutely aware of that changing skyline, of the obstructions and the other airspace users. So it's a lot of crew cooperation and making sure that everyone understands what the nearest obstacles are. So if we're low level, I'll say, right, okay, we've got a crane 2 o'clock, climbing, or whatever it may well be, but it's sharing that knowledge inside the aircraft.
Amazing. And I guess one of the things that you do, Dave, that Andrew doesn't do so much is land in the middle of London. So I see you guys landing on some sites, which I just can't imagine how on earth you've managed to get the aircraft into that location. So can you share any examples of places where you've been and landing sites that you've been in and around London that have been a little bit tricky for you?
Yeah, I mean, usually the way we work out where we can go is somewhere the size of 2 tennis courts, just to give you a feel. And the way you try and pick that out from the air is you learn the size of things. So for instance, that's probably the length of 2 double-decker buses, or things like that. So, and you can judge from maybe the number of parking spaces on the ground. Obviously they vary in size, but it's just picking stuff like that up, Some of the trickiest places are sometimes not maybe some of the most high profile places. So for example, there's lots of photos of us outside the British Museum, outside Trafalgar Square, places like that. But we have some really well practiced routines for places like that. The security guys there know us quite well and are able to clear sites. Probably some of the trickier sites are maybe slightly further out, and actually things like undulating grounds. I mean, a lot of the parks and car parks and big places in central London we go to are flat, but every now and again we go out and find some slightly more unusual places. And now I think, and the other challenge is clearing a site. So particularly in the middle of summer in central London in a park, sometimes it takes a little while for the police to turn up. So we either have to wait for people to clear that area for us because we can't land if they're there, or the police to come and clear that for us as well. And if the worst comes to the worst and the first site we choose doesn't clear, then we just have to go and find somewhere else. But we do, every now and again, our comms team are really good at putting stuff out on social media and just advising people if they see the aircraft orbiting, putting the sirens on. There's usually a reason for it, and if people just move out of the way, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see behind your shoulder there that those of us that are watching today is that London Air Ambulance is a charity. So how does that impact how you operate, and are the paramedics and doctors in the back, do they volunteer for this role, or is there another arrangement? How does it work?
So we're really fortunate on a day-to-day. You wouldn't know we were a charity. We are just allowed to just get on with the job we're doing. The doctors and paramedics are provided by the NHS. The doctors come from all around the world. And then all the paramedics on the aircraft work for the London Ambulance Service. So it's great. They will come and work for us for potentially a year. They train to a higher standard while they're here, get some extra skills, and then potentially go back on the road. So it's a really good way of those skills getting back out on the road. And pilots, we are paid employees, but the where the charity bit, the rubber hits the road, so to speak, is that we're not able to do it if people don't donate to the work that we do. And that can be from an individual on the street just maybe putting a couple of pounds in a collecting box, all the way up to, we have some quite big corporate sponsors as well. But it's just the variety of people who support us is massive. And yeah, it really is their support that keeps us going.
It is. It's such a fantastic charity and so much needed as well in a city like London. Andrew, NPAS is a regular visitor for us around Heathrow. And what always amazes me is how you manage to interact with the commercial traffic, often having zero impact and yet managing to get to the site where you need to be. Just for those people watching and listening, can you just give a sense of how you operate, how you manage to get into certain areas in what is a very congested sky?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that we can is a really credit to the controllers, both down, I guess, at Swanwick and also in the tower itself. London is busy. Over the years, a system of basically communicating where we want to go has developed. We use an A to Z map. London is then subdivided into grid squares, and this grid square system is used by the police on the ground, but also obviously for ourselves and for HEMS as well. So if we want to go somewhere, we'll call up and ask for a page number, and magic behind the scenes that that you manage allows us to get there. Now, we're acutely aware that we are unpredictable. As I alluded to earlier, I might say, right, I'm going north to south, so I want to get down to South London. The controllers start working magic to basically clear us a lane between perhaps Battersea traffic, London City traffic, or even Heathrow traffic. And then I haven't even got to the river, and suddenly my job's changed, and suddenly I now need to go towards Heathrow. And without delay, the controllers get us across, and that's absolutely fantastic, because especially on our pursuit, it may not sound much, but 30 seconds might make all the difference from us losing a vehicle, being on scene. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, then the cars can back off, we can track the vehicle, we can take the risk out of the situation. So time is absolutely critical for us, and the controllers do a fantastic job. I've got an example just from earlier this week. A call came in, we were on the ground at the base. Usually we should be airborne within 4 minutes of the call coming in. So a call came in, and we needed to search around Hounslow Heath, which is just underneath the approach to runway 27 left, so the predominant landing runway at Heathrow. So just as the crew were getting the details of what the tasking was, I had the chance to call up on the phone to the controllers and say, hey, look, trying to get here. I appreciate this is right underneath your landing traffic. And by the time we arrived on scene, 10, 15 minutes or whatever it was, your team had worked absolute wonders and swapped the runways around so that we could arrive on scene, do our search, and you swap the landing runways to the opposite side, so that we could do our job and there was a minimal disruption to commercial traffic. And there's always, I guess it is that balance, if there's life at risk, we have the ability to fly a higher priority, which is called Cat A, which HEMS use all the time. But I guess it's testament to the professionalism of the controllers. In my 4 years of NPAS, or over 4 years, I've never had to call that Cat A designator, which is basically get out of my way, I need the airspace. I haven't had to use that. So, it's a tribute to the fact that the controllers and the pilots can work together to find a solution where maybe I go high, or I can go really low, to fit in around that traffic. So yeah, it's a credit to the controllers around.
So on that categorization system, so just quickly for those watching, listening, you got A, B down below. So you guys are always B, right?
Yeah, we by default fly around on Cat B, which is just one less than HEMS, but we can go up to A if the situation warrants it. As I said, I've had missing person searches, suspect searches right off the end of the runways at Heathrow, or indeed over at London City, and I've never had to call that, and we've still managed to perform a pursuit commentary around the Heathrow airspace directly around the airport. without causing, huge delays to Heathrow. So it does work, and I guess that's trust that's been built up over years and years between the emergency services and an airspace provider, NATS, where I say where I'm going to go, you believe that I'm going to go there, but you also have that understanding that it is dynamic. I don't know if the moped is trying to run back to its home address, or is the driver just trying to panic left, right, left, right, left, right to try and get police. And your controllers have that understanding that I'm doing my very best to pre-warn you where I'm going, but actually it may not be, it may not end up in that direction. I guess your team is then working various different contingency plans in the background of what needs to be done. But we're very lucky to have that relationship with the air traffic control, of that shared understanding of the dynamic nature of our job.
There's definitely an element of a huge amount of trust between the two groups, and I always remember one evening where you guys were doing a job along the M4 motorway, which runs east-west just north of Heathrow, and you were chasing a suspect in a car, and they made the fairly iffy decision to take the car into the central area of Heathrow, which isn't a great shout on the part of the driver, because there's not many options once you get in there. And we thought, well, how are we going to manage this? So we actually managed to get you across one of the runways, and you sat in the middle over the central area between the two runways, and we managed to continue operation, everything safely separated, and the suspect apprehended in a multi-story car park. So the way it works, you get a successful outcome without impact upon traveling public is fantastic.
Very lucky that, as I said, got the controllers that can understand what we're up to, but the mission is sufficiently powerful that we don't need to sit directly on top of the suspect. You see Hollywood films where the helicopter's 20 feet behind, chasing like a scene out. It doesn't necessarily need to be like that way, and we can stand back from wherever the subject is, and just with that shared knowledge of our capability and what works for you. I think most of the pilots and crews have a pretty good understanding of where the effectively step down heights are with Heathrow and what the separation is, and can kind of work around that to as you said, a successful outcome without causing disruption to the public.
Right. And Dave, you've got a slightly different approach where I guess you get a call that comes in with a specific location. Just talk us through that process. What happens next when that call arrives? You get in the aircraft, and then I guess you're making a direct line to wherever you need to be, and we literally are just making everything disappear in front of you.
Yeah, no, I completely echo what Andrew said. You guys are amazing. So basically, we'll get the call that comes in. We tend to try and get airborne within 4 minutes. We usually, as the pilot flying, will go up and start the aircraft, and we try and give you guys a couple of minutes warning of where we want to go, just so things can start being arranged. And then when we go to lift, that 4 minutes after getting the call, as you say, we want to go in direct line as we possibly can. Usually not a problem at all. If we get a bit nearer Heathrow, when we get handed over to yourself or your colleagues, then, as Andrew said, we have sort of predefined ways of getting to you without causing too much disruption. But then you do amazing things like, as you say, swap the runways. And if we actually need you to, although I know it takes a lot of time, make a gap in the approach or departure. So we're always really aware that if we're getting within the vicinity of Heathrow in particular, that if we can give you as much information as possible, as early as possible, and that really matters. But we never get delayed, and you guys work it really well. And as you say, it's just that understanding. It's how close can we get, or what stage do we need to nip in? How can we fit in best around the other traffic, altering heights and locations? So as you say, straight lines are really important to us, but we rarely have a problem.
No, it's great, and it's amazing to watch you operate, and just to be a small part of that system in helping you get to where you need to be, and hopefully helping to save someone's life is something that we take very, very seriously. Andrew, it's not always about high-speed pursuits and things like that. You have a big role in ceremonial activity for NPAS. NATS and NPAS were heavily involved in the planning and the delivery of the Queen's funeral and other similar activities in London. How does it work, and how do you all work together to deliver something like that?
I mean, great one. I've been very lucky in the 4 years that I've been with NPAS, just the way my shifts have ended up. I've been involved in the Jubilee celebration, various state visits. When the American president comes into town, that's usually a big ticket item. They come with quite a hefty entourage, shall we say. The funeral of the Queen, the coronation, and then the fly past. I know you had Noel on the fly past last year with the 70 RAF aircraft. So attending or being involved with those, it was a bit of an eye-opener. Take the fly past and the coronation. You know, there's a big briefing that's hosted by the RAF in this particular instance, and only then do you start to understand the complexity that goes into an event like that to make sure that the emergency services can still operate. But you know, in that case, 70 aircraft arrive on scene effectively with adequate separation. And what really struck me was how every contingency had been accounted for between this and some of the other events. You know, nothing is left, no stone left unturned in terms of possible outcomes of, you know, weather, aircraft dropouts, emergencies, code words, abort words, you know, call signs, timings, plans, routes. All of that is all mapped out in intricate detail. And just being, as you said, a small cog in that wheel, it was fascinating just to see, right, well, how do we fit into this? How does this big ceremonial activity go off, but still allow David to do his job? Because, you know, London still functions irrespective of, you know, a fly past. How can he still get to a tasking that might well be just, you know, past? He has to fly past Buckingham Palace, and being involved in that was really interesting. But the short answer to your question is, there are briefings. We attend the briefings, and you know, we have an understanding of what's going to be where and where these kind of safe corridors through whatever ceremonial activity exists, so that the rest of the emergency services can continue without effect.
Fantastic. We've got so many questions piling in that I'm just going to dive straight towards them now, because we really want to try and get through some of them. Dave, I'll come to you first and ask a question from Stephen, who wants to know, what's your most eventful emergency and why? Big question.
It is, absolutely. Well, they're all eventful in different ways. I mean, some of the really memorable ones are the big ones that make the news. I mean, pretty much any major incident takes place in London that needs medical assistance, the aircraft or our teams are involved in. And I've been involved in some of those, so they really stick in your mind. But some of the other ones are just very small events, and I think sometimes it's people we go and help who are close to people you know. So, for example, I have a family, so if there are young people involved, some of those really stick in your mind because you can really empathise with the situation. And then I suppose the other side of it is just where we land. I think some of the other really eventful ones are just some of the dramatic places we land, not because they are unusual to us. We're used to landing in Trafalgar Square, or we're used to going into Grosvenor Square or some of the other big places like that. But I think it's more just the fact that when you land somewhere like Trafalgar Square, the whole place is surrounded by people. The police and the security guards are doing a great job of holding them back, but you are fully aware that there are probably several thousand people with their mobile phones filming, and you're just concentrating on the job, but just very aware of the number of people around you. So, yeah, many jobs sort of stick in your mind for different reasons. Sometimes, I said, because of the actual, or very often because of the medical situations, but then sometimes just the locations and the places they're taking place.
I love the blasé nature of the way you say it. You know, when we landed Trafalgar Square, perfectly normal.
I think the key thing, and this is the thing about the job, some people say, what's the most exciting part about the job? But we know we're doing the job well when it's a bit boring.
Right.
You know,
okay.
if day to day if we making the decisions and some of the places we land just become something that you do just in a very standard matter of fact way, which has got to be the best way to approach it. But yeah, no, I have to say I'm hugely blessed. I mean, some of the places I've been able to land, and just as Andrew said, I think the job itself just gives you an immense feeling of satisfaction, just being able to help people. I mean, we're acutely aware that if we're being called, somebody's probably having the worst day of their life, and if we can bring people there to help them and make a big difference in that, then that really matters.
Fantastic. Andrew, here's a question for you from Scott, who wants to know, this is a good one. Are there any environments that you cannot cover on searches due to environment or terrain? I'm hoping Scott's not a baddie.
I mean, it is a good question, and I've alluded to the camera system that we have is very capable. There are some areas, some locations that are harder for us to search. For example, we can't see inside buildings. So if something occurs inside a multi-story car park that's sealed off, we're not going to be able to help, or inside a shopping centre, we can't really assist. Now, that's not to say that we can't assist with the overall picture. The emergency services is basically a big old collaboration of different organisations. So perhaps we might not be able to do the direct search in that instance, but we can hold a containment around the exits of a building for whatnot, and then rely on our colleagues to actually then perform some of the other facets of the search. We obviously work quite closely with the Marine Police and the RNLI. We can come search the top of the surface, but we can't look underwater, for example. So we work as a team, and there are bits, even though it might not be directly related to finding whatever you're trying to locate, even by discounting, well, this person is not in this field or this field or this field, suddenly you've freed up X number of police officers, for example, from actually having to walk through Hyde Park at 2 o'clock in the morning looking for something, because we might not be doing the best job on a street search, but we have now just covered a large area that otherwise would have tied up a lot of resources for a long period of time. So that's just an example of how we can help, even though if we're not, our mission equipment can't directly assist with the task.
No, that's a really, really good point, which, I guess I hadn't considered that. You're not just there to find, but you're also there to potentially discount huge areas. Good shout. Question for Dave from Lauren, which is about weather minima. So we've got a set of weather minima that we use in the UK, but I'm guessing you've got something a bit more special. So how do you travel if the cloud cover, the visibility is low, and are there times when you just can't fly?
Yeah, there are. So we have a slightly lower minimum, but only a little bit lower. Generally, there are times we can't fly. If we can't fly, we have our team travel around in fast response cars. So London's always got 24-hour cover of its advanced trauma team. We are able to fly, as you say, in poor weather, but when the weather becomes too tricky, then it's just much safer to put the team in the cars, and then people are going to get there. Maybe slightly delayed, but fortunately, we're not held offline too often.
Fantastic. Someone's asked me a question. Fergus has asked, from an ATC perspective, how do we deal with priority movements? Well, as the guys have kind of alluded to, we do get a small amount of notice. That normally comes into us from our radar controllers down at Swanwick, who'll normally handle the aircraft as they lift out of their bases. And if they're coming towards Heathrow, we try and come up with a plan fairly quickly. And if we can get the aircraft through a stream of traffic without having to impact upon it, then we will. So some of the methods that we'll use there is bringing the helicopter maybe towards the airport and then diving through the final approach stream in say a larger gap than normal, or suspending departures for a short delay, or building in a gap where you can. But ultimately, as we've said, and it's particularly in Dave's world, if they're operating category A, and it's life or death, and you think, well, if that was your family member involved in that incident, you need that helicopter and that expert crew to get to where it needs to be very, very quickly. So ultimately, we will suspend departures, suspend arrivals for a short time until they get to where they need to be, because that's what it's all about. Catherine has asked about, do you have lots of problems with people shining lasers? Do you get that, Andrew? First of all, for you, do you get that?
Yes, unfortunately we do. As you kind of mentioned earlier, we do a lot of our flying after dark, and therefore we get quite a lot of laser strikes as well. I'm not really sure what motivates people to shine a laser at a helicopter. Is endangering the helicopter or the aircraft. The one thing I would say is that if you've made the misfortune of directing a laser at a police helicopter, then our mission systems are good, and the laser, it's an incredibly narrow beam, very, very bright, and it pinpoints back to the source. So even without a camera, you can instantly see where it's come from.
Right.
We just then also have the camera system to zoom into that person's, park or whatever, and you can immediately identify it. Even at dark, I've I've mentioned, we've got the thermal imaging system. So if you do it and it hits a police helicopter, then unfortunately you're probably going to end up with a knock on the door. And you know, the CA, the justice system take this very seriously, because on board the aircraft, when the laser strikes the windshield, even though it's a very narrow concentrated beam of light, it's very, very powerful. And as it hits the windshield, it basically diffracts and illuminates the entire cabin with a very bright, often they're green, but they can be different colors, source of light. And it has a dazzling effect. And it can be very startling, very dazzling. You lose situational awareness. Now, it happens frequently. Well, not every night, but you know, on a set of 4 nights, it will happen at least once, I would say. And then what we can do as pilots, I can then turn the helicopter slightly, so perhaps I can angle so that the rear of the helicopter effectively is pointing towards the laser. Our camera is on a turret, so it can still slew, we can still do our job, perhaps not as effectively because we don't have direct line of sight with it, but we can still do our job. And depending on the severity and the priority of what we're doing, going back to that mission commander, do we come off task, especially if it's, you know, now threatening the safety of the aircraft, apprehend that suspect and then go back, or do we try and finish what we're doing, especially if it's life at risk, and then we'll go on to the suspect. So we've got some laser goggles, for example, that we can put on that shield our eyes. But unfortunately, it is a real threat. It has an impact, but we can track who did it. I've been to court personally in terms of giving witness. I'm effectively, I guess, the victim of a laser attack. It's not a pleasant experience going to court, and I was on the witness side of things. So for anyone that's listening and is contemplating shining a laser at an aircraft or a helicopter, please don't. It is very, very dangerous. And if you do it against a police helicopter, then unfortunately your luck has probably run out.
Oh, Dave, is that something you've experienced?
Yeah, we don't get it very often because we're generally not flying at night too often, but sometimes we're covering back to the hospital after a mission or back to Northolt. I've been illuminated a number of times as well. Yeah, I just echo what Andrew says. Please don't do it. It is endangering an aircraft, and it's actually a very serious thing to do. It may seem like a bit of fun. It may seem like a way to pinpoint something and point an aircraft out to your friend, but actually the consequences of those actions are very serious. But fortunately, nowhere near as much as Andrew.
Yeah, it's something that we've suffered in the control tower at Heathrow, because it's a big old building and a nice target, and it's unpleasant. But it must be far more unpleasant when you're at the controls of a helicopter. So yeah, definitely agree with that. Next question is from Graham, and this is about fuel and endurance. So I guess for you, Andrew, you're spending a lot of time often in the hover or circling above a particular location. Does it affect the endurance of the aircraft?
Yeah, another really good question. When we're hovering, we actually burn more fuel than if we're flying around. There's a nice happy medium. If we're going full speed ahead, we're draining the tanks pretty quickly. And likewise, when we're actually in the hover, almost stationary, we're using a lot of fuel. So a lot of times you'll find us orbiting. There's a couple of reasons we orbit. We're using a little less power. It means we're using a little less fuel. And also, when we're searching for something, we're giving all the different aspects of that scene that we can see. And especially in London, where there are so many high-rise buildings, being able to orbit, we sometimes have to keep it quite tight, but we don't want our line of sight blocked. So we'll try and orbit, but sometimes we have to sit in the hover because there's a high building here, and you can only see straight through the middle in a certain angle. We also know that hovering in a extended period of time in the same spot is going to generate more noise, but we have to do what we have to do. As I alluded to earlier, there are 2 helicopters that cover London for most of the day. You'll see sometimes when it's a large public order event, protest or a big football match, for example. And for various reasons, constant cover is required. So you'll see the helicopter orbiting around, and then at a prearranged time, and a second helicopter will come in, formate effectively, usually slightly above, so that on the ground, the people looking at the big screen are seeing exactly the same image when we cut over from one helicopter to the other. They don't even notice the difference. Magic.
Right.
And
Fantastic.
then one helicopter will then return back to base, refuel. So there is a bit of this operational planning on the fly, because you sometimes don't know when these protests are happening. Sometimes you do, but you start to look at your fuel burn, and suddenly you've arranged a handover at a certain time, but suddenly you're having to hold in a really awkward position, using a lot more power because you're in, hovering downwind, for example, and suddenly you have to call your colleagues back up and say, hey, we said this time, I now need to bring it forward by 5 minutes because I'm not going to make that handover time. So there is quite a bit of dynamic planning on the fly, and if we can, we'll try and orbit, because that will extend our endurance as much as obviously we can without sacrificing operational effectiveness.
Fantastic. We're going to squeeze in one more last little question. You've both spoken about these incredible jobs, which are extremely exciting. But question from Khalid is, do either of you ever think about just giving it all up and becoming a sightseeing helicopter pilot along the Thames? Dave?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we have the beauty of being able to see London every day anyway, so we get the advantage of being a sightseeing pilot, and then also the interest and job satisfaction, I said, of being able to do the HEMS job as well, carrying the medical team. So actually, we're lucky we sort of get best of both.
Fantastic. Andrew, what about you?
I absolutely agree. London is a fascinating place. We have an astounding view every day we go flying. We try and share that airspace with other airspace users, and I absolutely get why sightseeing helicopters go up and down the Thames. But for me, one of the key kind of outcomes I get from this role is knowing that I've made some sort of impact, and you can instantly see that impact. We've found someone, or we've managed to apprehend a suspect. It's that job satisfaction, knowing that you're helping the public and you've made a direct contribution.
Absolutely.
That's a real one for me. So sorry, but I'm probably not going to be giving up the day job anytime soon.
No. Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm afraid that is all we've got time for today. A huge thank you to Andrew and Dave for an absolutely fantastic conversation, incredibly interesting. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Dave.
Oh, no, thank you.
And thank you to everybody else for watching and listening. In the meantime, the show will be placed on demand on the NATS YouTube channel in the coming days, and it will become magically a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Keep an eye out on our social channels for details of the next show. And as ever, if you've got any ideas on what you'd like to see on Altitude, please let us know. But for now, from me, thank you and goodbye.